Thank you for being here. As you can see, I have changed the title a little bit because the original title said something about net zero path. In Hempel, we're not actually at the moment on a net zero path as a commitment, so I decided to remove it from the title. But, yesterday we heard a lot about the challenges of the industry and the solutions that we are trying to think and implement in order to address these challenges. And Susanna very nicely actually set up the stage for the chemical industry as well, and Hempel belongs to the chemical industry. So let me tell you a couple of things about myself. I'm the head of sustainability of the decorative business of Hempel. As I will tell you in a minute, Hempel produces paints and coatings. My background is environmental management and industrial ecology. If you don't know what industrial ecology is, I suggest you Google it. It's quite interesting. Basically, it's how to make industry more ecological. Today I'm going to talk to you about how circularity and decarbonization can be associated, at least from a chemical industry perspective. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to tell you the journey that we've been so far in Hempel. And I'm going to end up, unfortunately, not with a solution, but with a question, with a challenge, because we don't know where to go next. So we would like your help on that. And of course, in the end, I will also give some hints on the types of solutions we are looking at to overcome our problem. So who is Hempel first? As I said, we are producing paints and coatings. We're a global organization. We produce 400 million liters per year. We have about 2.2 billion revenue and 7,500 employees. So we're quite big. We're not the biggest one, but we're global and we're quite big with the good and the bad that this has. We operate on 4 major segments. So decorative paints are the ones that you see around you, houses, buildings. Marine paints is mostly shipping, big boats, but also yachting, energy, renewables, as you can see in the picture. We don't show you that we also do oil and gas, because it's not so cool, right? And then we have infrastructure, which has bridges, railways, and so on and so forth. So this is our business, basically. One thing that you should know about Hempel is that we are owned by a foundation, the Hempel Foundation, which takes all the profits of the company and invests the profits in projects around the world on education, science, and biodiversity. So, and this has been happening for more than 100 years. And then, in some ways, we have sustainability in our DNA. However, I have to admit that although this is true in some ways, in some other ways, we didn't. So we only started putting sustainability in our strategy in a formal way 4 or 5 years ago. Before that, we didn't have a department or a formal sustainability framework to operate under. But some years ago, in 2019 specifically, we decided to develop the double impact strategy. And the double impact strategy said that we're going to double in size according to our revenue by 2025. And at the same time, we put sustainability leadership at the core of the strategy. So while we were doubling in size, we were going to also become a sustainability leader and magnify the sustainability impact that we exert. And when we did that, we also said, well, we have to have a sustainability framework in order to guide our activities, and we developed Future-Proof. It was launched 3 years ago. Future-Proof basically has 4 pillars, which looks at different aspects of our business. So performance looks at how we perform sustainability-wise in our operations, factories, stores, and so on. Products obviously covers products, but also packaging. So all the paint comes in some form of packaging. When we discuss about our partners, we think about suppliers and customers mostly, but also other partners sometimes. And obviously people refers to Hempel employees, but also the wider community in which we operate in, including employees' families, for example, and so on. So this is how we think about sustainability in the organization. A few words on why we work with circularity and decarbonization, because this is the topic of the discussion today. Well, as anyone must do, we did a materiality assessment that we update every year. And we said, well, there are like dozens of sustainability challenges that you can identify out there. But here are the most important ones. Is there? Oh, no, there's not. No. Here are the most important ones for paints, or at least for our organization. So we thought climate crisis, resource depletion, biodiversity crisis, and also health and well-being are the most important ones for us. And we identified in which ways we contribute to this. So how do we contribute to climate crisis? Through greenhouse gas emissions, that's easy. But also through resource consumption in order to produce our paints, and this contributes to resource depletion, which also is related to waste, right? And then when you emit waste, it means that you are somehow hurting biodiversity, especially if this waste has hazardous substances. And then you also have inequality in the workspace, health inequality, income inequality, gender inequality, and so on. So, this completes the picture, basically. And we said we're going to create platforms to address some of these problems. We created the Science-Based Targets platform to address issues of climate crisis, so carbon emissions, both in our own operations and in our value chain. The product sustainability covers mainly hazardous substances issues, but also what we call customer carbon, which I will come back to in a second. And the circularity roadmap covers paint and packaging flows because they are 99% of the materials used in our company, but also operational waste that we emit in our factories. And then you have people sustainability that covers both health and safety in the workspace, but also diversity, inequality, and so on. So this is kind of like to give you a big picture of how we address things. And this is why we work with circularity and decarbonization. A little bit more about circularity and decarbonization. We have a significant impact that we have to take responsibility for. So with regards to our emissions per million euro revenue, we are up there with other chemical industries. To be fair, this is quite high. So if you see, we have Maersk there, which is the big shipping company, and DSM next to us that produces, let's say, more energy-intensive chemicals, and they are actually one of our suppliers, and Hempel. So we have a significant impact. I have in the text there, we also have an impact with regards to materials, since our waste, for example, in decorative paints, paint waste is about 50% of the hazardous household waste, right? So it's a quite big amount. And this is something that we have to take responsibility for. Furthermore, apart from the environmental aspects, we want to stay relevant as a business in the future, and that's also a reason why we are doing these things. So this means that we need to maintain our license to operate, and I'm alluding here to CSRD and other legislation that is coming in waves. Many people talk about a tsunami, and I think we've heard about that in previous presentations. With regards to our customers, sustainability and specifically decarbonization and circularity comes up again and again and is becoming a qualifier for future sales. Many of our customers are issuing certificates of best sustainability supplier or circularity performer and so on. And these are becoming increasingly important factors. It's important to retain our employees. I mean, especially the younger employees, they want to be in jobs and work for companies that have meaning, right? Purpose. And this is also something that is often forgotten. And we also have financial incentives. In our case, we are not stock listed or anything like that, but we do have ESG-linked loans. And we are able to get better interests if we associate our loans with sustainability targets. So there are important business reasons to take into consideration here. And this is to come back to the customer CO2 that I mentioned before, and maybe to connect it to discussions we had yesterday. Paints by nature, coatings to be more precise, we refer to coatings to those that have industrial application. They protect assets, they prolong lifetimes of assets. In the case of marine, we have anti-fouling paints for the hull of the boats that improves the energy efficiency and the fuel efficiency of the boat significantly. It's a 3%, but that's a significant improvement. And these industries, the marine industry and the steel and iron industry, most of our paints, industrial paints, are put on steel and iron. They're responsible for a big chunk of global emissions, right? So we also have an obligation here, and it's the nature of our business, to decarbonize industries downstream. And by the way, not only decarbonize, because if you take into consideration that prolonging the lifetime of an asset is also a circularity strategy, it's also about reducing resource consumption and waste. And then turning ambition into action. So we know the why, we know the who we are and our frameworks. So how do we approach decarbonization? Let's start with that. Let's not forget circularity is not an end, it's a means to an end. The end for us, in this case, is decarbonization. We have other ends too, like waste reduction and so on. But for now, we'll talk about decarbonization. So I think you all know scope 1, 2, and 3. And if you didn't, I'm sure you know them by now. This is how it works for us. We have a science-based targets commitment of 90% reduction of scope 1 and 2 by 2026 compared to 2019, and 50% absolute reduction by 2030, again compared to 2019. And how does this look like for us? Not much different than the previous presenter. 95% of our scope 3 is to be found in 3 main categories. This is the raw materials we're using, the packaging we're using, and the VOC that you see here is volatile organic compounds, and it is the greenhouse gas effect, let's say, that is produced when they are evaporated during the application of the paint. So you can just assume that this is also material related. What is the conclusion? Well, first of all, let's notice also that 99 or 98% of all our emissions are scope 3, and then 95% of that is materials, right? So how do we solve this riddle? We want to double in size by 25 and presumably also grow after that. We want to halve our greenhouse emissions by 2030, and almost all the emissions are coming from materials that we are using. I think this is, by now, you've heard this story before, right? So I think this is where we all find it a little bit hard to comprehend what's happening here. Well, this is the answer, basically, and this is where circularity comes into the game. I don't know if this was discussed, I didn't see it the previous days, but there is this whole discussion about decoupling, which is decoupling economic performance, let's put it this way, from environmental impact. And if you have materials being the main source of your environmental impact, in this case carbon footprint, then somehow you have to decouple your economic performance from your material footprint, right? Of course, this graph refers to GDP and nations, but you know it's the same for companies. And you have relative decoupling where your revenue, let's say, grows and your environmental impact grows less quickly. And you have absolute decoupling where your revenue grows and your environmental impact decreases. And this absolute decoupling is what many of us is looking for to achieve. And how do we do that? Circularity, they say, right? So we went to our colleagues or partners in crime, if you will, which is circular economy. Maybe some of you have heard of the circularity gap reports that they issue every now and then about the circularity performance of countries and so on. And we collaborated to see, what are the levers in our organization? What can we do to reduce our material consumption while not hurting our economic performance? And you've seen different ways of this being presented. I like this one best because it doesn't have 1,000 R strategies. You basically need to implement 4 strategies or 4 groups of strategies, if you will. And they are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 because 1 is the most effective and 4 is the least. And this is often forgotten. And I'm sorry to say that about the recycling partners here, but recycling is the least effective strategy, and specifically for decarbonization is the least effective strategy. In general, there are exceptions, of course. So what does it mean? Narrow, use less material to deliver the same economic function, right? Number 2, slow down. Use the material for longer to deliver this function. Number 3, regenerate, bio-based, and so on and so forth. And number 4, cycle, which is collect and recycle in closed loop, preferably. And what does this mean? Okay, I think you all know that by now, but what does this mean for paint specifically? And you see how this operates from product design, where we have to design in bio-based materials, to functional use, to end of life. What does it mean for paints? By the way, we have organized a circularity strategy along the axis of products, packaging, operation, and services. Obviously, operations is not relevant for us today because it's only 1% of carbon footprint. But what about the rest? So for us, if you look at the left side, regenerate, we need to use bio-based and recycled raw materials. In our case, predominantly what exists in the market is polymers, resins. A paint is 1/3 more or less polymer, 1/3 pigment, and 1/3 water or other solvent. And we can do the same in packaging. We can use recycled content in our plastic packaging and possibly in our steel packaging as well, although it doesn't make much sense, but that's another discussion. What about end of life? Well, we can take back and recycle packaging, and we do that often. But guess what? It doesn't contribute to our scope 3 at all. No, unless if we use the recycled content back there, but then it's the same strategy. And we can take back and reprocess paint. If we reprocess paint into our existing products, then it can help a little bit. If we reprocess paint to new products, it doesn't help actually, because then we have to sell more products. So even if they are low carbon, we are increasing our carbon footprint. So you can forget about that, basically, for decarbonization. And what are we left with? And this is paints, right? So it's not so green for everybody else, I guess. We're left with the middle part there, which is narrow, slow. 1 and 2 is the most important one, the most impactful one. And for paints, this would look like, for example, using less paint to cover a surface. And fortunately for us, we have found that in many cases this can be done. Actually, the application efficiencies, especially for industrial applications where they use sprayers, are quite low. You have, on average, 50% of the paint lost or not needed, let's say. So you can improve on that, especially if it's on average. So you have cases where 100% is lost and cases where 20% is lost. Reducing repainting frequency. Well, that's something, right? So better maintenance of the assets. How do they call it? Preventive maintenance or risk-based maintenance, where you don't have to, for example, every 5 years just blast everything off and repaint it regardless of the state. And then with packaging, The recycled content in packaging isn't that great. It can deliver for us at best 20% reduction for plastic packaging I'm referring now. But packaging as a service, where we have reusable packaging that is being reused again and again and again and again for 20 years, this is possible, right? This can deliver a 90-95% reduction. But again, we need to, and as you have guessed by now, all these three things are service-based, right? Now we just sell paint. If we have to improve application efficiency, we have to be involved in the application of the paint. So, paint as a service, protection as a service, and so on. So this is what we're talking about. And of course, I'm trying to contain myself to what we can do with our business without discussing offsets and other strategies like that, right? But you know what? Let's see what we have done in the simpler things. So there are three strategies that we have said we can implement in order to decarbonize. Improve our existing products, so that is use other raw materials, reformulate, optimize existing products, formulations, sell different products. We can create new products, although the R&D process is quite long, so that's not, we're not relying on that for 2030, but still we can create new products, or we can convince consumers to switch from one product to the other because they have a better carbon performance and almost equal other performance, let's call it. So we do kind of an assortment management exercise here. And then you have the use less that I mentioned before, which is the big challenge, right? So an indicator of what we're doing there with regards to number 3, so improving products, this includes working with suppliers, right? So understanding the carbon footprint of our suppliers, looking at their decarbonization pathways in key raw material categories and key supplier accounts, looking at the availability of bio-based and recycled raw materials, also discussing with them about upcoming materials that are not yet on the market. And we are doing this with all our suppliers, and we're going to have a 70% spend coverage by 2025. And by the way, we're doing really good at CDP. We got an A score. But what else? How do we sell better products or different products, if you will? A hint, right? We have developed a scorecard that scores products along, 8 score categories. 2 or 3, well, 2 cover carbon scope 3, and there's a third one that covers customer carbon, but that's not accounted for in scope 3. And then you have also paint consumption and durability that cover circularity. And you can imagine that the two are associated. So if you have like a same product with lower paint consumption, we have lower carbon and so on. In addition to that, we are implementing a sustainable solutions definition. It's not ready yet, so I cannot show it. So actually, I could show it to you, but we haven't launched it yet, so I couldn't show it to you. But in 2024, we will be able to apply this in combination with the scorecard here and be able to actually classify our products to, good, bad, neutral, and so on. And then we're using these to drive product development and also sales. So these are internal tools for the time being. This is how we plan to address these things. But I consider number 1 and number 2, number 3 and number 2, I consider them mainstream business as usual, although I understand they are new, but if you've been here for a day and you're all involved in these things, I think many of us are doing these things in one way or the other. And I hope I come back next year and I can put something in this slide. Although again I could, but it's a little bit confidential and we haven't still launched anything. So, but how do we achieve number 1? I mean, in our case, this is how do we servitize. Maybe it's not servitization for everybody here, but how do we sell less? This is the problem. Or how do we use less, if you want to use a less provocative term? I don't know. But how do we decarbonize when we continue to grow in the amount of materials we are using? This is a problem. This is a question. So I just want to close with some thoughts and reflections here. And I think we've heard some of these things. We've heard some thoughts on this subject also yesterday from some other very smart people in the room, and maybe I can offer a little bit of an alternative direction or idea here. First of all, just to say, commitments create company focus and culture. You have no idea how big a driver science-based targets commitment has been internally in the company. I am now head of Decorative Sustainability and so on. Before I was circularity manager, and I was really envying my colleague that is heading the Decarbonization, because she had these science-based targets that everybody was trembling in front of, and everybody was like responding and trying to do something. And in circularity, I had to find ways to convince people to think about it and so on, until I found a way to connect it to the science-based targets. So then, problem solved. Second, doing something is not better than doing nothing. We suffer from this disease, I want to call it, where we're saying, well, we're heading in the correct direction. 1% better this year than last year. Yeah, but we have to reach 50% in 7 years. So don't do things that will just move the needle a little bit and will not have the potential to move it as much as it should be moved. Set the correct ambition. That's the message here. Change the way you measure success. In brackets, financial success. So this is something that is very new. This is something that I haven't even mentioned to my boss, to be honest. So you're the first to know. Why do we have to challenge this idea that revenue growth is the only financial health indicator or the major financial health indicator for a company. We have to be able to go to our executive boards and say, what if you protect and increase your margins and your profits, but you flatline for the next 5 years your revenue growth? Do it as a challenge, see what happens. Of course, they won't do it as a challenge, but we need to kind of like work towards arguments that point to this direction. I have no economic or business background, so I think these types of backgrounds are missing in sustainability departments, and we're trying now to like work more with financial to understand better how to present these arguments. Some more things. I have 2 minutes, so another important factor, I keep hearing, well, the customers don't need, the customers don't want, the customers are not willing to pay, there is no demand for this. I mean, come on, we've been creating demand for things where there was no demand before for as long as capitalism exists. We can create demand for sustainable products, I think. Nobody considers that. And I think, to go for a second in my specific decorative paints, where unfortunately all this sell less is much less effective, we need to do active marketing, raise awareness to the customers that there are certain sustainability aspects related to the paints they buy that they don't know of because no paint manufacturer has. And I'm just alluding to similar situations in other industries. Educate them, right? Thought leadership, make noise around it. Create added value that doesn't exist at the moment, basically. So active marketing, I think it's going to be a keyword to achieve these things. Transition from defensive to offensive lobbying, what do I mean by that? Rather than trying to just protect the status quo when we lobby governments and for policies, try to push further. And I've seen these things happening already. Because what do you do if you want to be a sustainable brand and a sustainable business and you lobby for more sustainability, not for less sustainability? Then you create a level playing field where you have a competitive advantage. So that's something to consider. And finally, change your business model. It applies to us. I think it applies to most of the people here if they want to start achieving these things. And of course, final word, everybody says it, so I didn't want to have just collaborate. I think all these things, lobbying, even the active marketing and the business models, change, servitization, they require collaboration across the value chain. But we all know that, so I have nothing else to say about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgios.